Hey there, and welcome to another episode of Selling AI. Today I'm talking with Jim Robertiello, Director of B2B Sales at Poppin, a vertically integrated workplace furniture company that's grown from like a startup into a nationally recognized brand over the past decade. Jim was one of Poppin's early account executives, started back in 2014, part of the sales process as they were building it from scratch, and has since launched markets in New York, LA, and Miami. Here's what makes this episode interesting. Jim is selling a physical product in a world obsessed with software and AI, which means the selling challenges look a bit different. So today we're digging into channel complexity, persona-driven selling, what pipe gen actually looks like when you're in a commercial furniture space, and whether AI has any business showing up in the world where you're selling something that you sit on in the office. So, all right, let's get into it. Jim, thanks so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Warren. Appreciate you having me on.
Great. Well, listen, you had an interesting path, pharma sales, corporate sales, been at Poppin for, I think, 11 years at this point, relatively early in their journey. What was that journey like? What did it teach you about selling? How have things evolved for you over the past decade plus?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's been, I think early on I always knew I wanted to be in sales, but I didn't know exactly where I was going to end up. And I think, gosh, being in Poppin 12 years now, it's kind of hard to think back on the original roles that I had prior, but they each kind of taught me something unique. And I think pharma sales, obviously, that was kind of crazy, right? I mean, long days, you're talking to doctors, right? You got to be pretty buttoned up. And I think I was 23 years old, baby faced, right out of college, going into doctor's offices trying to sell a product to people that are much smarter than me, that have been doing something for a decade, right? So that taught me a lot in the sense of being, you got to articulate your pitch, you got to be very buttoned up. And I think that taught me a lot of prep work going in. And then, after that ended, I ended up at a small family company, Hampton Forge. I say small, but it was a small company, but we were sold nationally into Costco. And that kind of let me know that I wanted to be in a family run, not necessarily family run, but a smaller environment. I think I interned at Verizon. That kind of told me, hey, I don't really want to be at, necessarily a large corporation. So I left there saying that's where I wanted to be. And again, these were only 1 year clips at each of these companies. And then finally I ended up at Equinox, which was I was selling corporate memberships, And again, that told me something that I can actually sell, I can sell something that I enjoy and I like. Nothing against cutlery and flatware. That wasn't really my passion, you could say, right? But selling fitness and health, that's something I'm active, I enjoyed. And, I learned the process there of selling something you truly love. So that's what that taught me. And then, I ended up at Poppin and here I am 12 years later. And that journey is a story of crossing paths, in a sense that the chief operating officer at Hampton Forge ended up at Poppin, called me up one day. He became the VP of wholesale at Poppin and said, hey, I have this job for you. Why don't you come in? I had no clue what it was, said it was Poppin, saw it was colorful office supplies. I kind of said, I'm not so sure this is going to be for me, but I respect him and I'm going to come in and take the interview. And I did, and it was so much more. And I'm so glad that I ended up, at Poppin because, again, it was going to be a disruptor. We were building something great. And building something in an industry that was kind of been the same more or less for the last century, right? And it's an old world industry. So I would say, yeah, I mean, those first three jobs taught me a little bit of each and what I wanted to do with my career path. And then kind of the journey of Poppin has been one of the most, couldn't even imagine or fathom how rewarding it would be, at the beginning. So.
It's awesome, man. That's a really cool journey. Some typical sales hops in there, right? So, which is great. You got to earn your stripes. Walking into doctors' offices, and you're absolutely right. Talking about things that they give you very little training on in a important setting really prepares you for other areas of sales. And so that's really cool. Let's talk about Poppin. What was it like early days for you? What was the sales process like? And really, I guess most importantly, how has it kind of like evolved over the past decade substantially?
Yeah. No, and I think coming into Poppin, what was the sales process? And this is nothing against how Poppin was structured in the beginning. It was all hands on deck. Like, we're talking very much startup environment, growing at a rapid clip. Didn't really have, this is before we had a furniture line, by the way, when I first joined. So that was being created in the background. So we literally just had desktop supplies, corporate office supplies, custom swag, like we did corporate gifting, it was, and the process was, well, lucky for us, Poppin was an approachable brand. It was new, so we had a lot of organic growth and inbound. And that was our sales process. Like, hey, my old buddy Matt, he was literally the SDR. He sat on the other side of me. He would get an inbound call. He would talk to him. He would lean over and say, hey, Jim, I got a hot lead. Mind if I transfer? and he would just buzz it over to me. I'd pick up. And typically it wasn't even furniture. We're talking desktop supplies. Maybe they wanted 1,000 custom notebooks, So that was literally and then who do we call upon? I mean, of course, businesses, any business that was either visited the website. So B2C was a big driver for us at that point, right? Anyone who came to the website, saw our products. And that really was the sales process. I mean, we had a CRM, we had NetSuite, so we had some structure, but that was really the early on process. Then once we launched furniture, that kind of put us into a new process, right? To be more buttoned up. We started doing more outbound. We were actually categorizing our leads, and we had a different stages, leads, prospects, all the way up to a customer. So to today, if you fast forward, we literally have, in terms of a sales process, it's like any company you could ever imagine in terms of being, A to Z. We've got, the lead gen into prospects, into follow-ups. We've got cadences. We've got conversions. Then they come into a customer. Then we guide them through the process. We've got project managers. We've got, constant update and outreach and everything in between. So, I don't know how else to say it, but it's fully structured. And then it went from no structure to fully structured. And again, that didn't really happen until furniture came along. And then we, started to put it all together. But yeah.
That's funny. So we've been talking for about a decade, and I thought it was the other way around, that you were in furniture and then you dabbled in supplies, which is humorous that I was
No.
under that notion. What I know is kind of early. You were kind of like an A at the time. Do you remember what was the decision making framework where it was just like, let's get into office furniture? How did that come about? Obviously, maybe not even really a similar ICP in theory, right? You're going like B2B in that
Sure.
scenario, right? Like, but yeah, what was the framework there?
Yeah, no, it's a good call. I mean, initially Poppin was thought to be solely a desktop supply company. I mean, that was the idea, right? And really it was supposed to be B2C. So it was just supposed to be a website that was running in the background, e-commerce. And then when we launched our products, they were vastly different and they disrupted the desktop market because most desktop supplies were gray, black, right? Think about it. There was no color, there was no design and stuff you put on your desk that you truly, to elevate your workspace, right? Whether that was at home or at the office. And that was such a hit that we're like, wait a second, we can kind of create a furniture line that does the same thing, right? That's
Interesting. Yeah.
different, has some color, a little bit more modern, like kind of disrupts the current corporate vibe. And that's kind of how, and then that evolved into even more add values like stocking it and doing design in-house. That all developed later, but it was kind of just sort of a desktop. And yeah, we sold file cabinets. We had a ping pong conference table. That was one of the first two products we had.
Yeah.
So we saw how successful those were. And selling a ping pong conference table back in the day was like, you rang the bell at the front. That was like big sale,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Compared
Yeah, right.
to desktop. But we saw how popular and successful those differentiated products were. And we're like, wait, we can probably maybe build a full line. And we had some really smart engineers and product designers that were already on board doing that. And it was an easy pivot for them to come and get creative with furniture. So it was just starting to evolve. It was being cooked up in the background when I first joined, but it still hadn't been launched yet. So really it was desktop, custom swag, like, notebooks, anything you could do to set up a company that would be customized. So
That's awesome. And so, like, you in the space, you have like a channel model and like a direct model. How do you kind of
yes.
manage that sales process for both of those? And from the beginning, was it always those two? Did you start with just going to dealers, or did you started as B2C? You probably started direct, I'd imagine, right?
Yeah, we did. I mean, we started direct and then the dealer and A&D sector started to gain traction, right? And that's where we had to evolve as a company. Because you're right, there is naturally some channel conflict there because we end up doing a lot of the same services that dealers do. And, most dealers, they have manufacturers, they can't really sell direct. They're going through the dealer and then that's a harmonious relationship, right? But initially, so the way you get around channel conflict like that is, I would kind of say radical transparency, right? Like we pride ourselves on being as transparent as possible. And that means pricing, our process, right, with our products. And that goes as far as with the dealers. So you eliminate the channel conflict by just being really open and saying, hey, I'm working this project. So is the dealer. How do we come together and make sure that everyone's protected and working on, as soon, because it's that trust level, right? As soon as you, like, there'd never be a world where I would go straight to an end client and say, hey, work with me. I can get you a better deal instead of them selling. That's ludicrous, right? So I think once the dealer market got comfortable with us and realized that we can work together too, and it's that communication and open line, and again, making sure everyone's protected. So within the deal, right? The confines of the deal.
Yeah, that's awesome. Early days of like just going direct when you first started the furniture line. What was that? What was that like? How are you getting your first clients? Were they your existing clients that were kind of buying desktop, or did you just go out cold,
Yes.
with basically almost a brand new business?
Well, we were calling cold too. I mean, when I say we were calling anybody, if you were a company in New York in our backyard, you were probably hearing from us. I
Right.
would say, small emerging markets. We weren't going after Fortune 100, Fortune 500. To say we did have those clients on the desktop front because they would order swag from us. That was a harder market to penetrate. But most of our clients started as desktop, which is interesting, right? I mean, so imagine we had 5, 6 years of clients that we sold desktop and corporate branding to. That's a pretty large Rolodex, so to speak. And we tapped into those initially, and we converted those were companies that needed furniture, and we converted a lot of those. So that's kind of what got us off the ground. And then we had a great marketing team as well. I think we were clever with our marketing. We were fun. We were different. We were funny.
Right.
Like that doesn't really happen in furniture, right? And so those things stood out. And so that again drove a lot of the organic growth. And that's when we started getting into campaigns and outreach marketing and stuff like that. But again, I would say most of our clients were natural conversions from our initial product set.
Yeah, it's interesting the business model itself to go from great like B2C desktop supplies. They're stodgy, they're old. I mean, at the time it was probably just Franklin planners and and paper inboxes, right? That were all black or brown, leather bound, right? Like you get in there and then you see a parallel like hey, this is what the office looks like. It's not just the desktop; it's a furniture office, right? Like it's like and then you're running a whole different business model. It's an interesting pivot.
Yeah. I mean, listen, we also had wholesale, don't forget.
Right,
So we had our products in Staples, Container Store.
right.
So if you pick up a pack of pens, you turn it over. We usually had a picture of an office with furniture, and we had our website. So
Sounds interesting. Yeah, right.
our penetration was all, we were the brick and mortar is also what drove people would call us up and be like, hey, I used to buy pens and notebooks from you, but it looks like you do furniture and you can.
That's funny.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
we got it from a lot of different avenues, but
Man, I can't think of another product off the top of my head really quick that would be like that level of like side marketing, right? Where it's just like here,
yeah.
like it's pretty funny that I can't imagine anybody would even like equate the fact that they saw this image of your furniture on the back of your notebook packaging and like, yeah,
Right.
all this as well. This like matches the same vibe of what I like from an office standpoint. That's really interesting.
Yeah. And they all work somewhere, a lot of them, right? At a company
Did you ever get into a scenario like relatively early where you ended up with a really big client where it became like stressful? Like what was the first time you were like, oh man, like we sold something, it's a big deal and we're gonna have trouble fulfilling it early on? Was there this point in time for Poppin?
There was. And I think I can say this now, Indeed.com, they were a big client of mine. And I'd only sold them custom pen cups, notebooks, stuff like that. I remember I had a big presentation. I had to go into the office and I was like, I was pretty nervous. They're like, I'm in Indeed's, headquarters
Yeah,
in New York. I've got my little bin of desktop accessories and I've got some stuff
right.
branded with their thing on, and I'm presenting this and I'm showing a slide deck. And I think the slide deck had a page about furniture and they stopped me and they were like, oh, so, you do furniture as well? I said, yeah, we do. We're starting to get into it a little bit more. And like, oh, we'd love to see what you could possibly do for us. And that turned into like, I think one of the larger orders at the time for Poppin, it was a big deal. It was like, no one had done like an office fit out. And again, we did a part of their office, but we got a little nervous because what are how do we project manage it? Like, what's the lead time? That was our first foray into like, okay, big leagues, we can do office build outs. And
Yeah,
so, and that just tells you the journey from like penetrating with pens. We're talking custom pens to get you
right.
in the
Yeah.
door and then converting that into furniture. But yeah, and then they became a very large client of mine over the years and obviously grew from like a couple hundred employees to like 10,000, something crazy.
Who was in that room? We'll kind of pivot into personas. Like, who were you? Directors of facilities at the time? Like, what was the HR like people that
Yeah,
were looking at like what was the room where someone went from what you were selling initially to like should we build out our office in this style?
it was HR.
Yeah,
So
well,
HR specialists, it's interesting. They would handle a lot of the custom swag stuff, right? Because usually for internal events or new hires, that was a big thing, right? So you join Indeed and you get a new hire packet and it's got custom pens and notebooks. and all that sort of stuff on. So they were in the room, and I think they also oversaw a lot of the culture, and furniture played into that. So, and even, I mean, at the time, it was probably just office managers as well, office managers, HR, and I don't even know if there were directors of facilities in that meeting, that particular meeting, but they obviously came into the fold eventually. And Indeed was very good at having an internal workplace team. So they had workplace experience managers that eventually came on and oversaw a lot of the furniture. So
Yeah,
purchasing and
and
buying.
probably a really good point. I mean, now thinking back, I say mid 2010s started to be where the like science behind office design and like the vibe before people used the word like what became important in like an office setting. So you guys are at the forefront there. How did that shift around with COVID? Obviously, there was a pivot in business model. How did that work out and during that time frame from a sales perspective?
Yeah, it was different. It was, I mean, as was COVID for everybody, but it was just a completely unknown and scary time. And I think for us as a business, we had just come off like one of the best months ever, right? I mean, 2019, you're right, because that shift mid 2000s and 2019, everybody, I mean, it felt like everybody was trying to refresh, do
Right.
something new in
Yeah.
their office, AI, tech, right? Trying to be more cool and functional within the workplace was just
Yeah.
taking off. And COVID completely, like, the hardest
Down.
stop
Yeah.
down
Yeah.
shot, right? And we're
Yeah.
like, wait a sec, where did our entire business go? And
Yeah.
we were able to pivot to work from home, work from home programs where we're selling our furniture to employees that were now remote. So we were selling acrylic paneling for desks, for, germ spread and stuff like that. So we pivoted a lot of different ways, but it was a dark time because I think no one was really investing in offices. No one was in offices, right? I mean, and then coming out of COVID, it was more of the same. It was very tentative, right? It was like,
Yeah.
what's hybrid? I don't really want to make an investment in returning yet. I don't know if employees are going to want to come back. We're downsizing, maybe breaking our lease, to evolving to kind of now where I think we're back in the sense that COVID has now created a thing where how do we get people back to the office? And that is a
Okay.
compelling factor. And it can't just be the same old, hey, we want you to come back, but our office hasn't changed. We've actually made it smaller and it's not
Right.
going to be very functional for you. And, the whole point of workplace experience is you're trying to bridge the gap from home to the office, right? You want it to feel comfortable, cozy. That's why people, not to that extreme, but that's where people feel most productive in an environment that they're comfortable in, right?
Yeah.
And
Right.
so you're bridging that gap in a sense, and that became very important as the return to office. And it's still happening as we speak. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
But things are ramping up for sure, and Poppin is reaping the benefits of a lot of that refresh, and we're being creative partners and consultative partners to our clients, and not just put a lot of great furniture that's beautiful and colorful into your space, but how do we make it functional? How do we match your different departments in your team, and what your actual hybrid goal is? Is it 3 days? Is it 2 days? Like, what do you actually need from a furniture
Right.
standpoint? So,
Yeah. It's
yeah,
actually like a pretty funny shift in trends pretty quickly. Like one, it's hard to remember a time where like before it would just be facilities and it's like how many people can I get in the office is what you're looking at, right? Like
right,
that's the setup, right? Then again 2010 it became a little bit more about do I want to come into this office? What do I like? How do you make it a place where people enjoy coming, a second home, and like do productive work? And that science came into it where like really like HR starts to get involved. There's like a people problem, the office. Then COVID shuts it down. You work from home, like it's a completely different perspective. Now everyone's optimizing their home space to try to spend all day there in a particular space. And then it's like, what do you come out of? I didn't think about the fact that now we're trying to get people back in the office several days a week, which is two challenges. One, you're right. I didn't think about this. You're trying to get people back in the office. So you want to make it pleasant. And two, also, how do you optimize for the fact that people are in 3 days a week instead of five? Like, how do you manage that flow? So that all like puts Poppin in like a weird kind of like sway in a market, a 15-year span where three distinct things happened in this space is kind of interesting.
yeah. And I mean, listen, you got to imagine the selling approach changed from pre-COVID to
Yeah, right.
post-COVID, right? You
Yeah,
got much savvier clients who are reading and figuring out, well, I can't just do what I was doing before. And, so again, that's had to become a lot more granular, and that's good because Papa was already ready for that. And that's what we kind of had already been doing throughout our process. Nothing really changed for us. We just had to get more specific with our clients and understand, more about what their return to office looked like. But what I will say is you imagine an employee that was having issues in an open desk area with no places to meet, that's a big concern. They're not really compelled to go back to that same environment, right? And that's where you might say, okay, well, guess what? We've added four Poppin pods where you can go and make private calls. We've made your desk a little bit bigger with privacy panels and to make it more comfortable. Those sort of things. Employees are like, oh, cool, right? Like they're listening and they're making it more attractive to come back. So, yeah.
Awesome, man. Cool, cool, cool. Well,
Yep.
let's dive into a second piece here, a little bit more in this space. So, not just from a sales perspective, once you close deals, you managing customers, it's an ongoing relationship. You're also involved in like the project management, the installation side of things, at least from a PM standpoint. How do you balance like your sales role and let's say this like semi-operational role on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. That's a great question because I think naturally in sales, people want to be close to the deal always, right? Because they're their clients. And you got to remember, we might do 90% of the work in terms of cultivating that client, getting them to a close, a great place where they've purchased all the furniture that they want. But then what does the client remember is the final 10%, right? Like it's the final mile that really is what counts in the end, because that's the last thing that they're going to remember, that you delivered on what you promised and what you've been promising for this 90% of the journey. And that innately says, well, I want to be really close and, hover over the process. But that's something that you have to obviously separate yourself from, because those aren't really revenue generating activities. And that's not really what you should be doing at the end of the day. And so I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, but I think we've got such a great project management team and we're such a small, nimble team that we over communicate. But I think what really changed the game is with the visibility aspect internally in our systems, right? So we've kind of got this thing where you can see when a deal closes, where it is at every single stage, so I can look in the system and see exactly where my deal is and how my project manager has progressed it. And I'm willing to reach out to him. I'm in a cozy spot and I'm seeing all the email communication that I'm still copied on. So it's more of like a visibility and understanding that an actionable thing where I'm taking up my time getting involved in it, right? So,
Gotcha.
yeah. Again, I would say having that internal visibility and that timeline track and all the information that's going on in the background. Because before it was just kind of living with our project managers, and then that's us
Right.
following up. But then that's the manual aspect, right? But having it actually in a where everyone can kind of see it and know exactly where a deal is at. But yeah, it's hard. I mean, I still stay close to my deals,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Plus, it's
So
like it's easy to get sucked into non-selling activities, right? Sales is hard.
correct.
Making sure your projects that you just sold don't go off the rails a little bit easier to kind of spend your time on. And there's actually like more roles like this in sales than I really realized, right? Especially in this space, construction, interior design, these types of things. You end up with this hybrid kind of like PM sales role. Seems like you guys are striking the right balance. You want to make sure it's delivered. You want to make sure your customer's happy, but like you're not saddled with the day to day that keeps you adding the value you should in the sales process in that way.
Yeah. No, exactly. I mean, it's a delicate balance, right? Like the initially the person, a client is who they dealt with us, right? In the beginning, and that's who they trust. So it's also beneficial to have us and know that we're along for the journey and that we're there if they need us. But that also our project manager is great. They're on top of everything. And, so, but yeah, hybrid role for sure. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Cool. Well, that's great. Well, maybe another tact here. So you launched the Miami market. I know you're a national brand, but you launched that market. What was that like? What did it take to open a new territory? Was there something specific that was like a big change in your day to day when you launched that market? What was that process like?
Yeah, definitely. So, and I launched LA first, and that was a huge learning
Gotcha.
curve because
From New York, you went New York to LA, like you.
correct. And
Yeah.
then down to Miami. So, New York was a little bit, I don't want to say it wasn't cushy because that's where HQ was. We didn't have any other locations. New York City was our backyard from a branding perspective. So a lot of people knew who we were and had heard of us. And we did some fair amount of marketing and advertising in New York. So, a lot of that was organic. But then going to LA, where I don't know the landscape, we've sold some projects there. We have some revenue in that market, but there's really not much, right? And all of a sudden you pop up a showroom, right? So we had a physical presence there.
Right.
We launched the market and there was a huge launch party and then everyone leaves and it was just me. And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
no, I say just me, but that's not like I didn't have
Yeah.
support
Agreed,
from,
but it fell on you, right?
it fell on me and I'm sitting there, it dawned on me. And, I had a great marketing team and I had great support. And so going back to your initial question of what does it take to drive a market, it's borderline guerrilla marketing because people don't know you and it's getting boots on the ground and networking and also leveraging your physical presence. but leveraging your physical presence and more of a way of just, hey, I have a showroom, bring clients to show them products. We were hosting events weekly, and I'm talking all themed, right? Or there was a certain demographic or channel we were going after, right? So there were dealer-centric events, there were end client-only events, there were A&D design that all had a speaker. We usually had panels to draw people in, and then we would all the AEs would be in there. So
Right.
that drove a ton of success because in LA people love events. It was just like they
Okay.
were,
Yeah.
and Poppin was the new person in town who was this. We benefited a lot from that, but that's starting a new market, and if you're in it, you got to be on the ground. And I was going, it's events, it's biz now, it's networking. Who are the mover and shakers of LA, right? In terms of the A&D community, right? Who are the big drivers? What do they do? Can I meet with them? Can I learn more about their process? Who are the dealers in LA that drive a lot of the business and that sort of thing?
Gotcha.
So, but yeah, tons of networking. And again, if you've got a physical office and a presence and you're selling a physical product, leverage that because our showroom it was a beautiful space and we had a ton of
Yeah.
great
Right.
product in there and we put a lot of innovative stuff in there that we were launching and there was newness. So,
Awesome.
yeah,
You were
that's
like I say, new kids on the block. Has there been a time in the past like 5, 6, 7 years in either like LA or Miami where someone came in to like the market that was new and like you weren't the new kids on the block anymore and you're like, oh man, like who are these? Who are these guys? Like you became kind of you moved up, got like closer to being the old guard, and there's somebody else doing the same kind of guerrilla marketing that came in, and you're like, oh man, I can't believe we're at this stage in our life cycle.
It's interesting. I just feel like Poppin was such a unique company. We still were kind of the only player in our line of work and what we did. There's two or three other players now that kind of do what we do, but we were still kind of the only ones. And I feel like you got to imagine a lot of the furniture deals in those markets are driven by dealers and A&D. And so when people search like how do I design an office, usually design firm comes up, right? They're going through those channels and they don't really require marketing. Whereas like people don't know who Poppin is. We have this model that's strange, not strange, but it's unique and it's not what the industry's. So we've got to get that voice out there and say, hey, this is what Poppin does. This is why we're different. And frankly, I mean, there was no other company like Poppin that ever was in LA in my time.
Interesting. Yeah.
So we benefited greatly from that. It wasn't like, Very, who you've probably seen with the Very desk, right? That's how they started. They never really entered the market while we were there, right? And they would have been
Gotcha.
considered a competitor. It would have been, they probably would have been on the streets and doing the same thing that I was doing, right? So I think just benefited from being the only one out there in that sense. And again, it was easy to speak to people about Poppin because we were different and very approachable. So
Right.
it made the process a lot easier. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's cool, man. Excellent. Let's maybe just pivot a little bit more. So let's talk about AI. Obviously, you're in a very physical space. What are the trends you're seeing in your space in relation to AI? Obviously, is there anything like in the physical space that people talk about when you're doing a sale, or is there like a shift in how people view what the office environment will be like, and so that's changed the sale? With like, how's that become a part of your day, or not at all because it's completely unrelated?
No, I think it is unique selling a physical product. And where does AI fit into all of that? I will say there, there is technology that is currently available. I think a lot of the larger firms probably use, but it's an AI technology that you don't know who the exact employee is, but it tracks the movement of the employees within the space, and
Wow.
it can track the utilization of which furniture and which arrangements and configurations that they utilize the most. So you can actually optimize via AI what not only what you're ordering and what type of furniture, but how you're configuring it and actually where it's located in the physical space. So that is becoming a new tool. And because normally what you would do is what's cool about Poppin's Furniture is very modular, it's reconfigurable. So we can sell something to a client. And if it's not really working out, we test it and then we reconfigure it and we can move it and we can kind of do it on the fly, where this kind of gets down to a science and gets some really data backed reasoning behind certain, floor plan designs and what we're selling to clients. So that's been unique. And I know Google used it in their Spruce Goose, which is their office over in Playa Vista, right? That was a big thing. And there was like 100 vendors that were involved in that. But there's some companies now that are working with more smaller to mid-size. They're making it more manageable. And so anyway, that's how I've kind of seen AI be beneficial. I think it's great. And I think that's why not do that before, being certain of a way that people are utilizing the furniture. So anyway,
Well,
I
that's
think
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, I think that's a cool technology. I think that and I am seeing a little bit in the design aspect too, which again, and like AI in terms of designing a space, right? So design software that can then just
Right.
design it out without actually having a human do it, which I still think is where I get a little bit torn on AI and messing around with physical like that should be a personal process, right? And something that you should do and talk through with the client. And right, it's a like furniture is a touch, feel, enjoy physical product. You sit on it, like you said. I mean, it's something that
Right.
you actually interact with, not technology or an AI. So
Right. Right.
I've seen that, but I'm not sure that really fits. And of course, as outreach. Well, how can we better narrow our target market, right? And
Right.
because furniture is very specific, you've got to catch somebody at an exact point in time where they're either moving offices, they need a refresh, or there's a need, right? So
Yeah.
that's difficult. I mean, you can't just cast a wide net because so many people already have furniture. It's just a waste of time, right? So you got to use AI. And AI has been a great tool to kind of narrow down on our who's moving, whose leases are up soon, who should we be reaching out to, and when, and then procuring, kind of narrowing down our messaging and just what companies and what industries are growing, right? Using that
Yeah.
data and reaching out to those. So I think that's been immensely beneficial in just growing the pipeline and in lead gen in general.
That's interesting. I'd say tracking software that you're talking about, is that more like something that like a facilities team would deploy and then you're leveraging the data when you're talking about it? Or is there something specific that Poppin may deploy prior to a build out or something there?
No, it would be something that a firm that we would partner with that
Okay,
actually
gotcha.
has the proprietary software.
Yeah.
And then it's usually done by device, so their computer, right? So there's a little bit of privacy
Yeah.
laws with that, but obviously, the software would be embedded. So wherever you go with your computer or your phone or whatever, if you're logged
Yeah.
into your
Right.
email, that's how they kind of track where you are. And they don't know who you are, who it is, but they can tell people are moving within the space, how
Using
long
what?
you sit somewhere,
Right.
who's using what, right? I
Yeah.
see it a lot in phone booths and pods, which you don't need the software for. It's actually it's a sensor you can put underneath the top inside the
Okay.
pod, and it can
Okay.
tell when someone's in there, how long they're in there, and then when they get out. So
Right.
that tracks utilization. So there actually are physical sensors too. So it can be either embedded in the technology or it can be physical, which is a little bit more of an economical route and easier for small to medium sized companies to kind of manage. So it's not really AI, but it is that physical part. You attach a sensor, but still
Yeah.
technology.
When you're like pitching that as part of the process, like what's the like ROI for the people, that better usage of what you're purchasing, or better employee engagement, or what's the end result for your potential customers, that you're like, hey, use this software, and then we like kind of build out your furniture, we do some tweaking over a couple of like months or years and kind of optimize the space. Why are they doing that? What do they get out of that?
Yeah, 100%. I think the way to do it, and if you can, is when you can. They haven't moved yet. They have furniture. It's maybe older. We would preferably like to see how they're utilizing that to get a sense, right? Because it's a little bit, otherwise, you're going in cold. We're still selling them a new solution or floor design that we don't know how it's going to work. And then we got to kind of do it after the fact. If we can get proactive with it, yeah, there's a lot of benefits in saying, well, how are people utilizing your space now? Oh, it
Right.
turns out no one's using this. It's actually people are meeting in the cafe high tables because they like that,
Right.
that atmosphere over lounge, right? So you can get points of data on an existing space before they move, and that's kind of where you want to catch them and get the most data collection. But then you can do it post. But what it does is that's the tell of how much people are enjoying the space, and you're offering them what they actually need to do their job and collaborate, right? So the benefit is happy employees and productivity, obviously, right? So people are in spaces productive, or people are most productive when they're in spaces, like I said before, they're comfortable in, but also, they're creatures of habit. Everyone is, right? So where do they want to work and how do they want to work? So yeah.
Awesome, man. It's really
Yeah.
interesting. Again, it's stuff that I think most would take for granted, right? I'm going back to kind of like my Apple days, where I'm sure it was like really thoughtfully designed at UPS. I don't think they really put the time into thinking about this.
Sure.
But Apple, this was done really well. Every building was different. Every space was different. I could just even think about like spaces that were like wholly unused, and it was in the wrong spot, or there wasn't a privacy for what you were trying to do, or just like the couch was uncomfortable, the back was too far from the front, right? So it's just like, and then we probably complained that there wasn't enough booth space because we were all in cubes. And that may or may not have been true, right? Like it could have been true, but if like, great, we see it's 25% utilized. Like there's never a time in the day where 75% of the booths are taken up. Well, then I don't have to purchase more booth space. That's just, we have to figure out the problem, right? Something interesting there. Yeah.
Yeah, and to your point, cost savings, right? Don't spend money on things. It's right that maybe you don't need, or people aren't going to utilize. So, I mean, that's a huge benefit in predictability for clients and knowing what they're purchasing and feeling confident in it. Because, going in post COVID, it was kind of like, well, I don't know here's my hybrid model, but this all sounds great in theory. This is a great design. You listen to everything I've said, but we don't know for sure until people are actually back in the space.
Right.
And so, okay, that's great. And then how do we track it from there? It's more of like anecdotal, hey, how are you feeling vibe, right? Versus data. So yeah.
Awesome.
Yep.
Cool. Well, maybe last question. I'd say how do you see like some trend shifting in this space over the next couple of years? Does AI change anything in this furniture space at all? Do you think your sales process will kind of be fundamentally different a few years from now, or how we're interacting at the office? What might shift in the next few years?
That's a great question. That's the beautiful thing. We don't know. I mean, I think we're in a little bit of a cycle where we had pre-COVID, then COVID, then post-COVID, right? And then everyone's kind of rushing to get everyone back to the office. And then I think things are going to ultimately change again in the next few years when everyone is back into the office. And then we've got to kind of follow as a furniture company, like, is the hybrid model here to stay? Is that 70% of the companies, or is everyone going back 5 days a week? Because what I honestly think is it's still in test phase. And I still think companies are still feeling out what is working best for them. And it's happening in real time now. And it's been happening for the last few years. And, I think we need to track that. And if it goes back to everyone's back in the office 5 days a week, do we know if that's going to happen? That's going to change things, right? And I think we'll get back to something close to that. I don't know if we'll ever go back 5 days a week. I think it's just super hard for companies. I know the Googles of the world, Microsoft, Boeing, they can make those calls, and Amazon, right? You got to come back. But for our large target market, I think mostly it's going to be hybrid. But we just have to be ready to adapt. And I think in a couple of years, we're going to see people coming back to Poppin and saying, hey, our idea of what we thought was the best return office has changed. And we're going to be back to the drawing board a little bit and saying, okay, well, now they need some more desks. We need to pare down on the lounge area. Who knows? But that's the fun part about our industry. It's always evolving. And, I don't want to, COVID was not a great event, but events like that impact, and we have to adapt, and we kind of sort of did. So can't say where we'll be, but, well, I think Poppin is poised to be ready because we're so flexible and nimble. And I think a lot of the French companies will ultimately follow suit, right? So, yeah.
No, it's weird to think because, 10 years ago, there was no notion of like work from home. So I think I had to work from home for a doctor's appointment in 2014, and I had to ask my boss, and that was the one day I worked from home, and I swear I didn't get anything done. I wasn't set up to work for a full day from home. And then it became the norm, and now we're switching back to a new norm, which ideally is probably 3 or 4 days a week, but that just leaves a lot of things to figure out. If you're in an office on a Friday, then no one's there. What was the point of being in the office? If everyone's in the office the same 3 days, now we're taking assets that we were using 5 days a week and using them 3 days a week. How do we manage that space in an appropriate way? It opens up a whole series of questions that actually kind of makes it more valuable to look at optimization, utilization, and also just overall productivity environment. Are people enjoying their space there when they got a taste of not going in anymore for a little while?
I think back to Poppin. Are you kidding? Working from home remote, that was not an option.
You're right.
And that was for, how it was. You had to be back, and we were there all day, 5 days a week. It wasn't hey, I'm gonna work home on a Friday because no, you're either sick or you're in the office.
You have to work. Yeah, right. Yeah,
right.
It doesn't seem it's so foreign at this point, right? Now it's a complete discussion point. Every job interview, it's is it an office? Is it hybrid? Is it remote? It's a major part of a job decision now that was just completely off the table in 2017. It didn't exist.
No, I know. So there you go. Massive change in a span of,
I'm sure you were in 2019, you were predicting a major pandemic that would completely shift the paradigm of work.
No, I know.
You were on a podcast back then, you were calling it. So, great, Jim. Well, listen, I really appreciate being on the podcast. Really interesting kind of backstory, the evolution of again, a new company in an old space that honestly is still the new company in old space. It seems like a new entrant every 30 years. So another 20 years until the new kid on the block comes along and disrupts Poppin, I'm sure.
That's for sure.
Appreciate you being on the show.
Thanks a lot, Warren. Appreciate it.
Excellent.
As always. Yep. Bye.
Take care.